Alright. Greetings, Earthling. You have landed on Renegade Files, your underground destination for paranormal tales, unsolved mysteries, and covert culture. I'm your host, Lex Gordon, broadcasting a pirate radio signal from the Jungleville Outpost deep in the uncharted tropics. This is Renegade Files episode 68, Rock Stars and Aliens. The old school UFO community gets a bad rap from skeptics, pointing out the cliché that UFOs and aliens are only ever seen by country bumpkins or backwoods madmen. But hillbilly sightings are not always the case. Many UFO sightings are reported by famous or well-known people, and some of these happen over cities, neighborhoods, or busy highways. President Jimmy Carter famously saw a large UFO while on the campaign trail. Russel Crowe has seen a UFO, and Kurt Russel saw the Phoenix Lights UFO while flying into Phoenix. But when you combine the glitzy world of rock and roll with the high strangeness of UFOs, the stories get weird fast, and that's why I'm here, to take you walking on the moon, get you all shook up and blinded by the light. So climb aboard the cosmic tour bus and come with me on a rocking adventure where we will kiss the sky, see if Mars is the kind of place to raise a kid, and hear some I'm sorry. Oh gosh, I couldn't resist. Anyway, we're gonna hear some hair-raising campfire tales as we dive into the way out world of rock stars and aliens.
Rock stars and aliens. Rock stars and aliens. Rock stars and aliens. Rock stars and aliens. Rock stars and aliens. Rock stars and aliens.
Two notes real quick before we get going. Much of the research in this episode comes from the book Alien Rock, The Rock and Roll Extraterrestrial Connection by Michael C. Luckman, and I'll put a link to that book in the show notes. Also, my own research comes into play here, and that is research that I did into the scariest place in the world, the pop culture media. Another note I want to give you, and it seems like I always have these weird disclaimers lately, but if my voice sounds a little awkward, it's because I bit my tongue the other day, and I know this is too much information, but I was eating barbecue, and I guess that's what you get sometimes. And at the time, it didn't seem that bad. But I'm only realizing the impediment now that I'm starting to try to record this episode. But time is money, so we're just going to keep on rolling here. I'm going to do it. It's fine. Just letting you know, I have to kind of speak around this injury that was self-inflicted. So anyway, chew slowly, kids. I know that's weird. Anyway, right on. Let's get right into it. So we're going to start right off the bat with a big hitter, the King. Elvis spoke to a confidant named Wanda June Hill about an incident that left him, well, let's see, this episode is unscripted also, by the way, so it's going to be a little more loose. So are we going to try and impression this soon with a bit tongue? Let's see. So Elvis told Wanda June Hill, quote, "We were away from the campfire in the desert. We saw this light in the sky moving weird, not like a plane or anything like that. It was different looking than a plane. It got brighter and it was coming in closer. Hell, it was way up there." I cannot do Elvis, so we're just going to read it. Anyway, Elvis said he could see it on account of the moon and the way that the object was lit up. So the moon was bright, and they could see this thing. It was cigar-shaped, oblong and rounded and had some window portholes on one end and lights along the bottom. Elvis said that they watched it, him and the guys. I guess they were camping while they were on the road. They also said, and this is interesting, that it made a sound like electricity or a buzzing metallic sound. Elvis said it was not like any engine he'd ever heard, and it went over them, and that their hair began to raise up, like prickle on the back of their necks type of thing. Elvis said that the hair on his arms and his head stood up, and he got this weird feeling like he was about to float away at any minute. Elvis says, quote, "Well, I thought they were going to take me, man. But we all felt it." So anyway, that was Elvis camping in the woods, and in the book it doesn't really specify when this was. Apparently when he was on the road at some point. One of his bodyguards got so freaked out that he tripped and fell and injured his face. And that when they ran over to him, he had no heartbeat, and that they sort of gave him CPR, and the guy came back and said that he was yelling about flying saucers taking him off, and he thought he was gone. Now that's crazy. Elvis and his friends said they didn't see the cigar-shaped object disappear, but they stayed up. So I guess, they were watching it and then it was gone. They didn't see it fly away or anything. They stayed up all night waiting for it to reappear. They even called the air command post at the local U.S. Marine base, and they said they had a UFO report that turned out to be nothing. And then Elvis said about that conversation, quote, "You know how they are, but man, we saw it," implying that, the government was covering it up. So it seems like Elvis believed that. Elvis also was famously in the military, so we have a situation where you have a pop culture figure who is also in the military that saw a UFO. And that wasn't the only UFO that Elvis saw. He says in the book, also talking to, was it Wanda Hill? I guess I was a friend of his, Wanda June Hill. Elvis says, quote, "A bunch of us saw one night coming out of the studio. It was right over us, right over LA, big as life. Man, it was weird. It was round like a saucer, and that night there were blackouts all around the area and across the country. You can't tell me that they aren't doing that. Checking out how our things work. I mean, they're coming, and damn, I hope I'm here, man. I want to see one. I want to see him up close. Hot damn." We're bringing that phrase back, hot damn. So start saying it to all your friends. Elvis said to see a UFO up close would be a blast. And then he says, and this is a quote that a lot of people have made a big deal out of, he says, "I'm from out there, man. I told you that." So I don't know if he really means he's from outer space, but, a lot of people have crazy theories about Elvis. And then here's a really bizarre story, all right? So one night, I guess they were at Elvis's house. Where was this? Oh, Elvis's mansion in Bel Air, California. This was in 1966. The King's bodyguard, Sonny West, suddenly became worried that a flying saucer had grabbed Elvis and abducted him because Elvis was out of his sight and they couldn't find him. Is that like the first thing you think of when you can't find someone? And then they did find him, and he was wandering around the grounds, and Sonny West, the bodyguard, said to Elvis, quote, "Jesus, I thought they got you." West said that he was only half joking when he remarked that Elvis might have been, as he calls, space napped. Now that's a good one, man. Elvis got space napped. He did have some reason for thinking that. Sonny, the bodyguard, had said that he had seen a flying saucer or some kind of light over the property that he couldn't explain, and it was right before that, or right after that rather, that Elvis vanished, at least from the bodyguard's attention. So after this event, they all went in the house and they were kind of, sort of shaken up by the event. And Elvis got his Bible and read from the prophet Ezekiel, who said the Ezekiel saw the wheel thing, and Elvis said they had UFOs in ancient times, and he said the Bible was proof of it. Elvis said they even had a landing pad, that they had lights on the ships, and that they had seen similar ships described by Ezekiel. Elvis had seen one over New Mexico. So there's a lot going on there. A lot more than the average person knows or thinks about when they hear the word when they think about Elvis, rather. Then we also have these stories of flying saucers being seen over Elvis's grave at Graceland. Several times, orange saucers have hovered as close as 20 feet over the silent tomb and shown laser lights onto the cold stones before zooming off into the clouds. And that's an account by a security guard at Graceland. He also says, "Use my name and I'll lose my job," so he wants to remain anonymous. The guard said that he had seen spacecraft around Graceland several times. He said they usually come between 2 and 4 in the morning when hardly anyone is around. So, if you want to go UFO watching and you also want to go to Graceland, maybe you can camp out around there. I don't know. Never been to that area. I'm not sure what the status is and how easily you could hang around Graceland or within sight of it at 2 to 4 in the morning, but maybe worth a try. So moving on, we have John Lennon. John Lennon had a mind-blowing, up-close and personal UFO sighting. This happened on August 23rd, 1974 at 9 p.m. It was a small penthouse of the Tower Apartments on East 52nd Street overlooking New York City's East River. So Lennon wrote about this in the magazine Interview, which was Andy Warhol's magazine. And in that article, he says, quote, "I was lying naked on the bed when I had this urge, so I went to the window, just dreaming in my usual poetic state of mind. As I turned my head, hovering over the next building, no more than 100 feet away was this thing." He says the hair on the back of his neck stood up, and we already saw that phenomenon with Elvis and his buddies. Lennon said that the object appeared to have, quote, "ordinary electric light bulbs flashing on and off around the bottom." So he said to himself, is it a helicopter? He realized it wasn't making any noise. He thought it might be a balloon. He said it drifted away at about 30 miles an hour. He said it was large, circular, and coming toward him. It was shaped like a flattened cone, and on top was a large, brilliant red light. So not pulsing as any of the aircraft we'd seen heading from Newark Airport. These are quotes from the magazine article. He said when it came a little closer, he could make out a row of white lights that ran in a circle around the rim of the craft. He said they were flashing on and off, and so many of those lights, it was dazzling to the mind. He said it was about the size of a Lear jet. It was so close that if he had something to throw at it, he probably could have hit it. The UFO had dark metallic color. It floated silently less than 100 feet away from the couple. I guess this was Yoko and John. They said the object went past the United Nations Plaza building, slowly turned left, crossed the East River, and headed in the direction of Brooklyn and disappeared from view. John shouted from the balcony to the UFO and said, "Stop, take me with you." Then they both went inside, I guess him and his girl. "I almost didn't call you to go outside," John confessed to May. Oh, so I guess it was someone named May, not Yoko. He said he was afraid that she wouldn't believe him, that she would say, "What was John on?" And he didn't think anyone would believe him. And he said, "I can't believe it." He couldn't believe it himself, that he had seen a flying saucer. He said he was in total shock. Lennon went to great lengths to assure his friends that he wasn't high on any substance when he spotted the flying saucer. Among the people he told about the sighting was his trusted friend and advisor, Elliot Mintz, who believed the story. He did take photographs of it, but he said that when they came back, they looked like they had been through the radar at customs, like the film was ruined. He asked his good friend Bob Gruen, who was a famous photographer, to call the newspapers to see if anyone else had sighted the UFO. This is in New York City. So sure enough, reports had been received by the local police station and the news media. The New York Daily News received 5 telephone calls from people who had seen the same UFO or seen a UFO at the same time. And 2 people gave reports to the New York City Police Department, which isn't a lot of people in New York, but there's also a lot going on there. And so to notice something like that, there's a lot of lights. It's not like the country. That's a pretty cool story. Lennon referred to his UFO sighting in the liner notes of his Walls and Bridges album, where he wrote, quote, "On the 23rd of August, 1974, at 9 o'clock, I saw a UFO." That's pretty straightforward, right? He further referred to UFOs on Nobody Told Me, which was sadly one of the last songs he wrote. In that song it says, "There's a UFO over New York, and I ain't too surprised." John thought that the governments of the world were covering up the truth about UFOs. He said, quote, "If the masses started to accept UFOs, it would profoundly affect their attitude toward life, politics, and everything. It would threaten the status quo." So yeah, that's for sure. And then there's some other cool stories. I mean, there's a bunch more. We'll get into them. But there's a group, basically unknown group called Klaatu. I think that's how you say it, Klaatu. And they released a song Calling Occupants, which was intended to make contact with space aliens by proclaiming World Contact Day. The song became notorious because of the rampant rumor that it was done by the Beatles under a pseudonym. After much investigation, the band members were identified as Canadian session players. But even to this day, Calling Occupants remains the strongest musical overture to summon the Space Brothers to Earth. That's crazy, right? I don't think I've ever heard that song. Maybe I'll look it up. Now, here's a cool story. Everybody knows Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones. Mick Jagger installed in one of his estates in England UFO detectors. So these are sold. You can buy one. They operate on the principle that flying saucers create electromagnetic fields. And so these detectors detect electromagnetic fields. And when they do, an alarm goes off, ostensibly indicating that a UFO is in the neighborhood. So Jagger, who actually has recently purchased real estate on the moon from a company called the Lunar Embassy. I mean, wow. Anyway, and on that same note, if anyone is in the market to buy property on the moon, don't go through the Lunar Embassy. I don't even take a commission, and I'm selling some property that I have on the moon. I'm selling it for 1 Bitcoin per acre. All you need to do is send me 1 Bitcoin at the time of the transfer, and I'll put my address to my wallet in the show notes, and then email me and tell me your address, and I'll mail you the deed. All right? There's not a whole lot about Mick Jagger's UFO sighting, although he did see what he described as a cigar-shaped mothership while camping at Glastonbury Tor in England, and this was in 1968. I guess it made a good enough impression upon him that he installed UFO detectors at his house, or his castle, or whatever it is, right? So we all know David Bowie, who created Ziggy Stardust, his alter ego, was sort of supposed to be an alien. He had red hair, crazy makeup, body paint, outrageous costumes, and surreal lighting and effects on stage. His band was called the Spiders from Mars. You know, he was a showman. He loved all that stuff. So the whole Ziggy Stardust thing was sort of a showpiece, you know, a character that he created for the stage, and it was based on someone from Mars who came to Earth and became a rock star or whatever. He was interested in UFOs. His mother saw a UFO in 1970, and it sort of instigated David Bowie to start looking for UFOs. He would routinely interrupt interviews to go to the window to see if any UFOs were waiting around outside. He owned 1,000 books on the subject, according to his biographers. He had a telescope set up to look through an open moonroof of his limousine, and he would search for aliens and UFOs during his concert tour. That's awesome. In 1974, David Bowie and his wife Angela were transfixed in their Detroit hotel room when an afternoon television news flash read that UFOs had crashed in the area with several aliens aboard. That's something that I'd like to look into, a Detroit UFO crash with aliens on board. I've never heard that story. When was that? 1974. The spaceship was reported to be about 6 feet wide and 30 feet long. The 3 creatures were killed on impact when the spaceship plummeted to Earth. Crazy. I guess sometime later they said that was a hoax, but they always say that. If you listen to David Bowie's song Loving the Alien, you realize that he's in reality the son of a starman and an Earth mother. Now, we've seen that stuff before in the Native American traditions, the Anunnaki. That's ancient alien theory based on some of that logic or speculation. So there's a really famous story, and this is cool. It's crazy. It's about Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix filmed sort of a musical movie called Rainbow Bridge, and they filmed that in Hawaii. It was in 1970. So a lot of the filming was done at the Haleakala crater. Haleakala, I guess, crater on the island of Maui. So one of the guys with him was surf guitarist Merrill Fankhauser, and he said, quote, "The entire crew were making their trek through the crater at 10,000 feet with donkeys loaded down with cameras and other equipment when all of a sudden, out of a clear blue sky, a silver disc appeared hovering over a cinder cone. Jimmy and some of his cast saw it first, and Jimmy walked out on the cinder field of an 800-year-old lava flow with open arms, saying, 'Welcome, space brothers.'" They say dozens of phone calls came into the local radio station about the sighting. Later, Jimmy told fellow musician Curtis Knight that, quote, "The craft had come down to put its spiritual stamp of approval on the show." He also said that he'd been emotionally and physically recharged by the experience. I guess when the UFO went across the sky, Jimmy said, "There go my friends." He played a total of 3 45-minute sets, and after each set, he retired to a sacred Hopi Indian tent. Witnesses swore they heard musical tones emanating from the rocks and stones following the concert. And this gets better, okay? There was a very tall tale about one of the hippie girls who was in the movie, and she wandered off the trail, and she went down into a lava tube, which I guess is a cave formed by lava that is erupted in the past, and now it's dried. She said while she was in the cave, she encountered 2 gray aliens with big dark eyes who were collecting plants and rocks. According to guitarist Fankhauser, quote, "The spaced out girl said the aliens sprayed her with something, and when she awoke, she could not talk. She claimed that it took her several weeks to regain her voice." And then this guitarist says a more plausible explanation is that girl was stoned immaculate, and she imagined the entire episode. Well, that is one possibility. Now, this guitarist Fankhauser, he's a longtime student of Hawaiian folklore, and he said that legends abound on all of the islands about strange lights seen in the night sky flying into and out of the mountains. This same guitarist said that he had spotted very advanced UFOs that were very real and made no sound. I guess he's a pilot, and he says he's flown various types of aircraft and seaplanes, and that he has knowledge of aerodynamics, and that the craft he saw had no aircraft or helicopter parts or wings or blades or noises. He said he met a tourist who was retired from the US Navy who had also seen them, and said that he was, quote, "thoroughly baffled." Now, this is coming from a guy who doesn't believe the hippie girl who saw the aliens in the cave, but I guess you gotta draw a line somewhere. So according to the book Alien Rock, UFO activity has been centered around that crater on Maui since the 1800s. So the Rainbow Bridge concert film features performances by Jimi Hendrix, of course, also bassist Billy Cox from the Band of Gypsies and Mitch Mitchell from the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and I guess a bunch of hippie girls running around a volcano. I really don't know. I've never seen it, and I'm a huge Hendrix fan, so I need to check that out. It says that a voice states in the beginning of the movie in no uncertain terms that the film was produced by individuals who are in direct contact with the Space Brothers. Curtis Knight claimed that Jimmy and other members of his band had an exotic cone-shaped UFO encounter, and that they saw a tall alien near Woodstock, New York on a cold winter's night in 1965. He says it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and they were trying to make it back to Manhattan, a drive that's more than 100 miles, and they were going through a blizzard. Now, Curtis, who was one of the band members with Jimmy, said that, well, he told this story to UFO researcher Tim Green Beckley, and that the musicians got out of the car in the snowdrift and the temperatures inside the car were plunging and becoming freezing, and that the heater had broken. It was on full blast, but the car was still cold. And according to Curtis, a glowing cone-shaped object suddenly lit up the road in front of them, landed in the snow about 100 feet away, and the musicians were overcome with fright. They got back in the car, and the side of the alien spacecraft opened, and out stepped a very tall being who floated toward them. Curtis noticed that the snow was melting in the wake of the creature. He said that in a matter of seconds, the being came over to the right-hand side of the van where Jimmy was seated and looked right through the window. Jimmy seemed to be communicating telepathically with it. The interior of the vehicle began to heat up. The snowdrift completely vanished. Just then, the creature disappeared and the strange UFO lifted off like a rocket from a launching pad. Jimmy never did talk too much about what had happened, said Curtis. He sort of let me know that the cool thing was not to bring it up. It was supposed to be their secret. Members of the group behaved as if they had been placed under hypnosis, and no conscious memory of the incident existed. Curtis says Jimmy was convinced that in the near future, people from outer space would bring a great positive power. They'd come to our planet to help mankind and alleviate our struggles against evil. Jimmy told one of his girlfriends, Monica, that extraterrestrials would bring about a great change on our planet, and that love, peace, and brotherhood among the people of Earth would start to blossom again, just as it did in ancient civilization of Atlantis. In his last poem, The Story of Life, Jimmy referred to the approaching UFOs as angels of heaven flying saucers to some. Fascinating. Sting also saw a UFO. He was skiing on vacation in Switzerland, and him and a friend saw what looked like the top of a mountain lit up like a Christmas tree. They said it was bright and it sped away at a high speed. Shortly after that, Sting's wife Trudy discovered a crop circle on the couple's estate in England. This is in the same area where a lot of crop circles are formed. In some cases, UFOs have been seen and photographed hovering over crop circle sites. The video for Sting's song I'm So Happy from his Mercury Falling CD shows little dancing gray aliens. Interesting. So we also have Tom Petty, who toured with Bob Dylan, George Harrison, and Roy Orbison, and I guess Jeff Lynne. That was a group that they named the Traveling Wilburys. That was in the 80s. These guys spotted a UFO, or at least Tom Petty did, flanked by helicopters while cruising up the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu, California in 2003. Tom Petty's wife saw it too, and she says, quote, "I thought they were landing in Malibu." Petty was so shaken by the incident that he lost control of his car and almost plowed into a bunch of photographers who had gathered to cover some, like, Adam Sandler's wedding. It's kind of weird, right? So we all know Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters and previously Nirvana. He named the Foo Fighters after the strange balls of light that followed aircraft during bombing raids in Germany. David Grohl's record label is also called Roswell Records, named after the UFO crash in New Mexico. Dave says, quote, "I used to have freaky dreams about UFOs. When I was a kid, I really wanted to see one, so I would just sit in my front yard and say, 'Take me, I'm here. Can you hear me?' In the 5th or 6th grade, he says he found out about Project Blue Book. That's the U.S. Air Force's official probe into flying saucers. So he sort of became an independent UFO investigator. People tell stories of Dave Grohl coming to their house, like a friend or whatever, and seeing dead grass in the yard and saying, 'Hey man, that's definitely an indication that some form of life form landed in your backyard.' Dave says, quote, 'I've seen some weird stuff. On a Foo Fighters tour, when we were driving through Arizona, we saw what looked like weird little explosions going in a circle moving through the sky. Even as a child, I just couldn't understand why anyone would want to be so close-minded as to think there was no life anywhere but on our tiny little ignorant planet," unquote. Dave Grohl believes that many crop circles may be the work of space visitors. He compares them to alien graffiti. He says they're coming and putting tags on cornfields and is an unexplained phenomenon. Dave says, quote, "People are sort of looking back at ancient religions and starting to realize that they have a lot more to do with the unexplained than they could ever explain before." Profound. Thank you, Dave Grohl. Clinton and Bootsy Collins encountered a funky UFO while they were driving through Toronto. George Clinton, the P-Funk All-Stars, says, "We saw something, and it was like this bright light that came straight out of the sky and hit the car. It beat it up like oil in water or mercury in a thermometer and rolled off the car. All of the street lights were out for about 8 or 9 blocks. We just tried to get down to where the street lights were. We didn't even talk about it. We just sat in the car not saying anything. Yeah, I'm sure it came from up there," George said, end quote. He believes that humans are descended from outer space. He and his band members often discuss their UFO beliefs aboard the tour bus when they're traveling across the country from one gig to the next. That's good times. So Afrika Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force. He's the self-styled godfather of hip-hop culture. Also a member of the Zulu Nation, and he sighted a bunch of UFOs in 1979. One time, while on a bench near the Bronx River with 2 of his friends, Afrika Bambaataa spotted 3 glittering white round-shaped objects in the clear blue sky. He said the UFOs kept following each other and appeared to be flying at an altitude higher than airplanes from nearby Kennedy and LaGuardia airports fly. Bambaataa said on another occasion he was driving through New England and, I guess in Connecticut, he and 2 of his friends noticed strange movements in some black clouds. He pulled the car over to the side of the highway. He said the objects got smaller and then appeared to be heading straight for them. Him and his friends jumped back into the car and tried to get away. He thinks it was the mothership referred to by black Muslim minister Elijah Muhammad. And then you get into that whole thing, which we're not going to. Country music legend Merle Haggard hitched his star to the UFO Roswell Festival. He played annually in Roswell, New Mexico, which is pretty cool. Merle Haggard said, quote, "If that thing came down in Roswell, then it is the biggest thing to happen since Christ." A man who does not mince words. So Merle Haggard had a UFO music festival also, the first one held in 2003. Featured Merle Haggard sharing the spotlight with Mary Stewart and Pam Tillis. His 2004 concert was moved to the Eastern New Mexico State Fairgrounds. Willie Nelson played at that one. It drew a huge crowd, 10,000 people or more. And as a side note, Merle Haggard and Willie Nelson were regular listeners to Art Bell. That's awesome, man. Art Bell is a legend. So, we all know Deborah Harry and Blondie, and she has got the famous, popular, I guess you could call it rap song, where she talks about the UFO and the aliens eating cars or whatever in New York. But she tells us, quote, "My father was driving me somewhere and there was a lot of traffic." And she says this was many years ago. And she said she saw red lights that seemed to be hovering over the cars, and then all of a sudden they just popped into a billboard and disappeared. She also said, quote, "I'm gonna let them come for me." You know, I'm starting to notice a theme here, right? Of rock stars wanting to be abducted and telling the aliens to come get them. I don't know. This is some weird escapism trope that seems to be rearing its head in these stories, right? So there's also a story of Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead taking a long, strange trip, so to speak. He admitted that for 2 days he was locked in a tremendous struggle. He says, quote, "A tremendous struggle in a sort of futuristic spaceship vehicle with insectoid presences. Large insect-like beings, described as praying mantises, examined Jerry Garcia for 48 hours while he felt that he was abducted. I guess they put him back into his house and everything was fine. And we're not going to go over the obvious possibilities here with Jerry Garcia or anyone else. Yeah, there could definitely be some lysergic acid going on, right? I mean, that is the natural sort of reaction to some of these stories. So the British band The Moody Blues had a close encounter with a cigar-shaped spaceship and possible small alien greys. This was in 1967. One of the members, I guess, Graham Edge, who was the drummer, says, quote, "We were returning to London after a concert in Carlisle. It was quite uncanny. We were mesmerized as if in a dream. We could see the object. It was shaped like a fat cigar with a low protrusion on top and 7 dull red lights on it. The upper half of the object appeared metallic, whereas the lower half was red and pulsed from left to right. Suddenly, all 5 of us were gripped simultaneously with dread and panic." He said as they drove off, they looked back and they could still see the object pulsing away in the field. Years later, when someone asked him about the incident and what the aliens looked like, he made a sketch of a small gray extraterrestrial and said that the sketch seemed to come from inside his mind, raising the possibility that the Moody Blues had actually encountered a being or beings not of this earth. After their experience, the Moody Blues started to record cosmic albums like Days of Future Past and In Search of the Lost Chord. The Moody's first track, Procession, on their 1971 album Every Good Boy Deserves Favor, broadly hints that extraterrestrials are at the origin of life on this planet. So that could be said about a lot of songs, but interesting. Australian singer Olivia Newton-John, who we all know from the movie Grease, which a lot of people seem to really like. She encountered a UFO in 1974. She said her and her friend were riding in a car on a desolate road. Olivia Newton-John suddenly had a weird sensation that something was nearby. She said it was a prickly feeling, rather like static electricity. She recalled she looked around and couldn't see anything. Then, she says, quote, "I was stunned by what I saw." I guess suddenly. She says the object seemed fairly small at first, but increased in size with amazing speed. It was brilliant silver, yet seemed occasionally to glow with the halo of different colors. It moved at a terrific pace and seemed to change direction very quickly. It would hover motionless for a while like a bright star before moving across the sky again. The shape changed as I watched. First it was triangular, then it changed into a ball. Olivia Newton-John said that before this, she didn't believe in UFOs. She never gave it a thought, but that now she does. We also have rock and roll singer Sammy Hagar. He sort of took over Van Halen from David Lee Roth. I personally like the David Lee Roth Van Halen stuff better. I was never a huge Sammy Hagar fan. He's alright. But he does say that in 1960 he had, quote, "an unbelievable experience in Fontana, California." He says, I'm a firm believer that I have seen, have felt, have been contacted by space aliens 2 or 3 different times. So in an interview with Guitar World magazine, he said, quote, I have received information that has been valuable in my life from those people, and they have used me in an experimental fashion. When I was about 18 or 19, they downloaded everything that was in my head. When he awoke about 3 a.m., he said, quote, my whole room was so bright that I could hardly keep my eyes open. When it was over, I was shaking. I almost passed out. I was sick to my stomach. It was so scary. The aliens communicated via mental telepathy. Not a word was spoken. When pressed for a description of the aliens, Sammy Hagar said that they were just energy. He emphasized that he wasn't doing drugs when the encounters happened. The experience sent Sammy on a course of curiosity. He bought a telescope and started reading UFO books, and since then, he's had 3 or 4 other contacts. He also told the magazine, quote, I have narrowed them down to a people called the Nine, who are called that because they are from the 9th dimension. Sammy said his publishing company, Nine Music, is in honor of these extraterrestrial friends. He says, quote, anyone who thinks that we're the only ones here, despite the vastness of the universe, is crazy, unquote. Sammy Hagar also said that anyone who doesn't believe in aliens should be put away, not people who do believe in aliens. That's pretty clever. So there's also a weird story about Rick Wakeman. He's the keyboard player for the band Yes. You might know their song, Owner of a Lonely Heart. That was their big one. He had like some experience of missing time when they were recording in France in 1976. And then he got arrested for sneaking into an airplane hangar where he had been told there was some unusual spacecraft being stored. He also saw a UFO while writing a song for the album on the veranda of a beach house in Miami, Florida. I'm not sure what album that was. It was 3 a.m. and he saw what he thought was a shooting star, but that it fell across the sky, it stopped and stayed for an hour, and then shot off in a different direction. He found out in a local newspaper that other people had reported seeing a UFO that same night. So after this UFO sighting, he spent a year talking to people who claimed to have met aliens and just sort of went on a mission to talk to everyone he could about it. So everyone knows the huge sort of first makeup wearing group, Kiss. Ace Frehley was the guitarist. His character in makeup was called the Spaceman. He had that silver looking stars over his eyes. So this was in Westchester County in New York in 2002. Ace Frehley says, quote, I had an alien ship land in my backyard. He told this to radio interviewer Eddie Trunk, adding that he had videotaped the encounter. He said the flying saucer may have abducted him and then deposited him back on Earth with no conscious recollection of what happened. He said that there was a circular burn mark 27 feet in diameter on the ground. He says he vividly remembers taking off and that now he can see into the future. He said, for example, I know for a fact that I'm going to take a ride on the space shuttle before I die. I really don't think that happened, though. I would be interested to see that video. Where's that? Something to look into. He also saw what he described as an enormous baseball-shaped UFO, so round, outside of the window of a 747 when they were flying. He says, quote, it was very strange. And as I was about to shut my eyes, I noticed a bright ball of light out of the window to my right. I blinked once or twice to make certain it wasn't some sort of an illusion, but sure enough, this thing was still there. He said it looked like an enormous baseball and its actions were completely erratic, moving from side to side. The UFO remained in view for a brief period, then darted off, traveling quite rapidly. We were pretty high up when it appeared, leaving me to conclude that it was a UFO. You know, a lot of people have seen UFOs from planes like that. A lot of pilots. So Phoebe Snow is a jazz, pop, rock, and gospel singer. She's also a songwriter. And she's attended an abduction support group in New York City to learn exactly what had happened when extraterrestrials started contacting her and a few of her friends through a Ouija board in 1975. That's crazy, right? There's a lot going on there. She said that she tape recorded an intense session with the Ouija board, and when the tape was played back, 2 aliens named Lactoped and Urusai identified themselves and said that they came from an intergalactic civilization based in the inner Earth and in the Bermuda Triangle. The aliens started making telephone calls to her where she would hear tiny screeching voices on the other end of the receiver. After 5 months of communication, Phoebe and her friends were so terrified that they burned the Ouija board and were forced to contact leading UFO researcher J. Allen Hynek for advice. I mean, let's not mix Ouija boards and aliens, please, people. You're just asking for trouble. So an episode on rock stars and aliens wouldn't be complete if I didn't mention Tom DeLonge, the former frontman from Blink-182, who founded the To the Stars Academy and claims to have exotic material, that is some kind of metal from the UFO that the government gave him. We don't know what this is. We don't know what he's doing with it. Apparently the government funneled some money through his organization, and it's all very cloak and dagger. I think what happens is when famous people see extraordinary things, people pay attention to it in a different way. Isn't it weird that we give more credence to someone just because they're famous? You know, you see this a lot of times in certain things like politics, where a movie star will have apparently some opinion to weigh in on the economy, right? Or like a famous race car driver who has something to say about like the environment or whatever. It's out of their wheelhouse. So why do we give it credence? Well, just because naturally that they're famous and successful, we think that they know what they're talking about. It's really weird. Doesn't mean that they don't, but let's see. So moving more into the modern world, we have Miley Cyrus. So little Hannah Montana said that she had an experience when she was driving through San Bernardino with a friend and they got chased down by some sort of UFO. She says, quote, "It looked like a flying snowplow. It had this big plow in the front of it and it was glowing yellow." She said her friend also saw the UFO and she's confident about what she saw, although she did admit to being under the influence of marijuana dabs at the time. What she calls weed wax. Weed wax is like 100% THC, super strong. Not that I would know personally. But Miley Cyrus also said she believes she saw an alien piloting the ship. She says, quote, "I did see a being sitting in the front of the flying object. It looked at me and we made eye contact, and I think that's what really shook me. Looking into the eyes of something I couldn't quite wrap my head around." I mean, that's kind of a famous story, you know? And a lot of people smoke weed and don't see aliens, so it doesn't mean that caused the sighting. So Demi Lovato, she doesn't just claim that she's seen UFOs, she posts pictures of them. In an October 17th Instagram post, she shared several images of unidentified flying objects in the night sky above Joshua Tree. And Joshua Tree is an area that comes up quite a bit in the world of high strangeness. Demi Lovato says, quote, "Over the past couple months, I have dug deep into the science of consciousness and experienced not only peace and serenity like I've never known, but I also have witnessed the most incredibly profound sightings, both in the sky as well as feet away from me." So Demi Lovato says that she was at Joshua Tree with Stephen Greer, and any UFO researchers know Stephen Greer. He does the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind thing where they go out into the desert or into the woods and meditate and try to call up the aliens and then have sightings of things in the sky. You can do that too for I think $2,000 to go meditate in the woods with Stephen Greer. So Lovato also says, quote, "If we were to get 1% of the population to meditate and make contact, we could force our governments to acknowledge the truth about extraterrestrial life among us and change our destructive habits that are destroying our planet. End quote. So we already talked about Kurt Russel, well, a little bit in the intro. And he's not a rock star, but he did see the Phoenix Lights from his private plane. Post Malone, who is, I wouldn't say rock star, but a music star, whatever he is, a rapper. He went on Joe Rogan in July, so he was interviewed on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, where Post Malone told Joe Rogan he had seen multiple UFOs throughout his life. He said the first time was when he was 16 in upstate New York. He said his aunt and uncle were very strict, and they had to go to bed at 10 p.m., but he was looking out the window with his cousin and they saw a light and it just stayed there. He said he's seen UFOs in the skies above Utah and California. He said one of them looked kind of like a classic force field, like a drone or a dome in a circular shape. He said it stretched out when they were looking at it and that there were 4 other witnesses. So the pop star Keisha, she has a UFO on the cover of her album Rainbows. She said in July 2017, she was also in Joshua Tree, and she says, quote, "I was on nothing. I was totally sober, just a lady in the desert." She said she looked up in the sky and there was a bunch of spaceships. She said there were 5 to 7 UFOs. I don't know why I didn't try to take a picture of it. I just looked at it. She said it was after the lights disappeared and returned in a different formation that she became certain that they were UFOs. So you may know Alicia Keys. I had a chance to hear Alicia Keys play piano for a private performance. She said she believes in aliens. She did an interview in 2013 with some BuzzFeed writer. She thinks that the aliens already walk among us, and when it comes to the subject of UFOs, she's confident that not only has she seen something strange, but she says, quote, "I'm sure you've seen a UFO. Haven't all of us seen something flying in the sky and it's at some random time of night that doesn't make sense and it's not the shape of a plane?" And for more deep cuts, you can check her out. She has an interview in an article called Celebrities Whose Real Names You Never Knew. We talked about Olivia Newton-John and the things she saw. Nick Jonas, who's a pop singer, he's been talking about UFOs for years. In a 2015 appearance on the UK show This Morning, he says, quote, "I was in my backyard in LA. I looked up in the sky and there were 3 flying saucers. A friend with him also saw it. He said he went online and there were 3 identical sightings 2 weeks before." It's pretty cool. Actor January Jones, but we're trying to stick to rock stars. So that's about it. And that's quite a few, that's a lot. That's a lot of UFOs and a lot of rock stars seeing them. It's cool. And like I said earlier, it does fall into this weird category of, we kind of give a little more credence to someone because they're famous. May or may not be fair, but sort of seems to be human nature. That was a little bit of a different episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Kind of a lighthearted fare. I thought we needed something lighthearted after some pretty heavy-duty episodes lately. I want to say thank you to everyone who listens to Renegade Files, all the subscribers. The last 2 months have both set records for downloads and plays of Renegade Files episodes, so thank you so much. If you really want to help the show and help me keep doing it, you know what to do. You can go to patreon.com/renegadefiles. There's a link in the show notes. You can check it out for free for a whole week. And during that week, you can look at all of our posts there. You get the Dark Intel files, which is all the research I do for every episode. It also includes free MP3s of the background music, downloadable transcripts of the episodes, and all the research that I do for episodes. Some cool pictures and a bunch of other posts on Patreon, like bonus episodes and behind the scenes stuff. It's a really cool space. I work hard on it, and if you decide to stay for just a few bucks a month, you can help crowdfund Renegade Files. It keeps the lights on, so help me there, and thank you so much. I want to say thank you sincerely for coming along for a dive into rock stars and aliens with me today. Subscribe and follow the show So together we can do it next time as we dive into the deepest covert stories where logic clashes with the official narrative. I am so glad to have you in the Renegade Files crew. Until our next adventure, I am your fearless host, Lex Gordon. Stay wild, future child.